Today's lesson, we are going to be discussing data type. We have been using a couple of these data types, but we've not really discussed them as a topic because it's an important aspect of programming, the data type. So in JavaScript, specifically, we have several data types. One of them is number, another is string, which we have been using since this lesson started. The third one that I think we've used a couple of times too is Boolean. And the other ones that we have not touched at all is object, array. These two we have not touched, but we are going to go in depth. I'm just going to briefly touch on this because we are going to have a special lesson to teach this because they are really, really big and not something that we can treat under this. So for numbers, I told us any number value that is not in a single quote or double quote, that is a number and it's an integer. This is an integer. This is a float, number with decimal values. You can even do fraction, but to say 1 over stuff is going to give you 0 point something. So they are also fractions. So these are all number data type. But when you put this in a quote, it becomes string. Becomes string data type. Can also be double quotes. So these are all string, even though it has number in it. So if we say var x equals to 30, console.log data type, let's see what the data type is, what JavaScript tells us. So I already mentioned what this type of does when we were discussing operators. So type of will tell you the data type of a given variable or literal. So if I put a number in front of this is going to tell me the type, which is a number. So if I put my variable here, x, which represents my number, it's also going to give me number. So the data type is a number. What if we say y equals to 0.7? Will it still give us a number? See that type of y is also a number. So for a string, I told us once you have anything inside a quote, then that is a string. We cannot type something like this, hello, like this. This is going to give us an error, even though it's a string we are typing, but because it's not inside the quote, you can see the color of this one is different from this. So this one, JavaScript will be expecting that this is an identifier, which we have not defined here. So if we run this, you will get a reference error, hello, because we have not defined this that we are using. But if you put it in a quote, then everything is fine because this is a string. So if we do type of, so if we do type of A and we print this, it's going to give you string. The other data type, Boolean, is any value that is true or false. So it's just two values, true and false. Doesn't have any other value that is Boolean. So Boolean is either true or false. So if we say var b equals to true, then the data type of this b becomes a Boolean. So if you do type of b and you run this, you will get Boolean. If you change this to false, it will still remain Boolean because those two Boolean values are true or false. That's what Boolean are. Before we go to these two, let's just take a critical look at this data type, how it behaves when you are using them for calculation or mathematical arithmetic operation. So when you, in JavaScript, when you want to calculate numbers plus number, it does the actual arithmetic calculation. So if we say 1 plus 2, 3 plus 2, it's going to give us 5, which we have been doing a couple of days ago. But when you change one of these values to a string, it will concatenate both, which will be 3 and 2. Now, there's an important thing I want us to see here. What if we do 5 plus 3 plus 2, which has one of the number to be a string? You will expect that it should concatenate this and this and this because we have a string among. But that will not be the case because JavaScript reads the code from left to right. So at this point, JavaScript does not know that there is a string in the queue. So it's going to add this 2, which is 8. Then it will take this 8 and tries to add it with this. Then it will encounter a string and it's going to concatenate these 2 with the 8. So if we run this, you will get 82 instead of 532. Now, to verify this case, if we change the order of this string and bring this 5 to the end, for example, in this case, because JavaScript reads from left to right, it's going to want to add this and it will encounter string. And for that purpose, it's going to convert this number to a string and concatenate both, which will give you 32. It will try to add a 32, which is a string, not a number, a string, to this 5. And it will also become string plus a number, which it will convert this one to a string also and concatenate both. So you get 325. So you see the difference here. Doesn't matter how many times you try to add something in the front here, because it has encountered a string before, is going to be taking that string along and is going to be converting every of all this one to string. So if you run this, you will get all concatenated. So it's not going to calculate this and calculate this differently, no. Unless you have something like this to change the precedence. If you have something like this, then it's going to make this one a string, which is 32. Then it's going to sum this one differently because you have grouped them together. So if we run this, then you are getting something different, because 5 plus 3 plus 6 is 14. That's the 14 you get at the end here. So it's going to add this, then concatenate it with these ones. So this is very important thing to understand, because this kind of thing can create logical errors if you're not careful. And because JavaScript automatically assigns data type to our variables, unlike Java or other programming languages like C++, that forces the programmer to define the data type of a variable before assigning value to them. JavaScript is dynamic. It's going to assign the data type automatically to the variable. You see here, we just declared a var and assigned a value to it without defining to say, oh, this X should only contain number. There's nothing like that here. But JavaScript automatically detects the value you assign. If you see, when I hover on this, it's showing Boolean. When I hover on this, it's showing string. So it automatically checks the value that you assign to it and give this variable the necessary data type. For example, if we do var g equals to 3, let us check what the data type is right now from the beginning. You see, type of g is going to print here. Let's change this so you see it. So type of g is number. So without changing or redeclaring g, we're just going to change the value to a string. Let's run this code again. You will see automatically type of g has changed to a string. The same, we can also override g and make it Boolean. And if you check it now, it becomes Boolean. So we only define g once here, and we reassign the value of g to a different data type. JavaScript automatically knows that the data type has changed. So that is very important to know. Because of this dynamic behavior, your code can be prone to logical errors if not careful to understand this precedence or how JavaScript handles number and string together. So let us look at array. Before we talk about array, let me give a quick touch more on Boolean, because sometimes you wonder, where do you use Boolean and the rest? So Boolean is mostly used for conditional statements. So you want to know if a condition is either true or false. That's when Boolean come to play. And there are a lot of comparison operators that return Boolean value to us, which we did in the last class. So if you check, for example, x equals to y, when you do a comparison like this, the result is always a Boolean value. So any of the comparison operator that you use will always return you a Boolean value. If the condition is correct, it will return true. If the condition is wrong, as in this case, the condition is wrong, it's going to return false. If you change this to not equal to, then the condition is going to return true. So Boolean values are always used for checking conditions. So we will discuss more of this Boolean value when we start talking about conditional statements. Let's talk about array. Arrays are written in bracket form, like this. This is how to identify an array. So if we do something like var x equals to square brackets like this, this is we declaring this as an array. So if we print here the data type of x, you see here that it says it is an object. So in JavaScript, the data type that the type of any stuff that has multiple value is seen as an object. So it's not going to say here an array. The same if we create an object, for example, an empty object is also going to show as an object. So this is how you define an array, and the type of will always return an object. So how do we use an array? I will brush through it, and we will have a separate class on how to actually use an array. So if we want to define an array with a value, we put the values separated with commas like this. Or we can also assign using the index. For example, if you want to put a value in position 1, the index starts at 0, and you can assign a value to it like this. And when you log x, you will see all the values that are inside. You see that the first one is now 4 because we reassigned to it. If we remove this one, you will see that the position 1 here is 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is how to modify the item in position 1. Say we want to change item in position 2, it's going to be here 1, and we change 2 to say 5. And if you run this, then you get 4, 5, 3, 4, because this is how you modify an array. So how do you define this, the fourth one there, object? When you want to define an object, let me take out this again. When you want to define an object, you say var x equals to square brackets. Remember we said this used to make a code block, right? But when you assign this like this into a variable, this is no longer a code block. This is different from this and having an expression here. This is different. This is a code block, but this is an empty object. When you assign it to a variable like this, it's an empty object. And you can also log the data type and you get objects instead of a code block. There's nothing like code block data type. So how do we put values into an object? We can enter key. Remember when we define our array, there is no key. We just put in value, a list of values. But in an object, we have the opportunity to define a key. So instead of these auto-generated keys, which is zeros, one as the index, we can choose the name of the key by ourselves. For example, say A equals to 1. And again, we can also separate individual values with comma. B equals 2, C equals 3. We can do this. And when we console log X, it prints out the object, just like the way our array prints out. So here you see the key. This by the left side before the column is the key. When I say key, is the name that you will use to access the value. Then after the column, the item on the right side is the value. So if we want to access this value 1, you do x.a. That is how to access a value in an object. In an array, you use the square bracket. In an object, you use the dot operator to access the value. So when you put dot, you mention the name of the property. This is called a property, or you call it an attribute. So if I mention anything like a property of an object or an attribute of an object, I'm referencing this key. So you say an object dot the property name will give you the value. You see here, 1. If you want to access this 2, you do .b, and you come here, you get 2. You can also change the value by doing .b equals to, instead of 2, we want to change it to 10. Then if we run this .b, you're going to get 10, the new value, and not the old value. The old value is overwritten. We will go in depth in this object down the line because it's very, very important. So I've told us how to use type of to get the data type. So in JavaScript, we also have undefined. And undefined is the value that is given to a variable that is declared but not initialized. Undefined is a value that is given to a variable that is declared but not initialized. If we log this x, if we log this x, you will get undefined as the value. Is the value that is given to a declared variable that is not initialized. The same if you try to print out the type of X is also going to be undefined because the type of undefined is also undefined because it has not been assigned a value. So JavaScript does not know the data type. So the data type is also undefined. So if you assign or initialize the value X to a value, then it's no longer undefined, but now the new data type that you assign to it. You can also reset a variable from an initialized state to undefined state by assigning undefined to it as a value. When you assign undefined to X, it goes back to the set of declared but not initialized. It goes back to undefined. So in this use case, there are some times that you want to reset a variable for some reason. You can just set it to undefined like this. That's the last thing I wanted to discuss with us about data types. Task 6. Declare a variable of all the available data types. You can assign any value of your choice in this case, then log the data type using type of. Then the third one, declare an object that contains your information, your personal information, something like name, age, location is fine. Just these three properties is enough. And that is it for today.